We will now discuss queuing models. This discussion would be in three parts. So what is a queue? A queue is another term for a waiting line, and a queuing system is simply a system that involves a waiting line. Queuing theory is a branch of management science that enables the analyst to describe the behavior of queuing systems. This topic is important in business considering that the ideal business scenario or the ideal business model is one wherein consumers would go to your establishment and actually fall in line and wait for your products and services. So, if your product and service is good enough, expect that there will be a queue, and therefore you have to be able to manage a queue. Primarily because, again, if your product is good enough, then most likely by next week or next month, you would already have a competitor. And in order for you to maintain your customers, then you have to be able to manage their expectations in terms of their customer experience in your establishment. One of which is their experience in queuing. Queuing theory does not address optimization problems directly. Rather, it uses elements of statistics and mathematics for the construction of models that describe the important descriptive statistics of a queuing system. In a queue, members are known as calling units. The queuing system descriptive statistics include such factors as the expected waiting time of the calling units, the expected length of the line, and the percentage of idle time for the service facility, which is the source of goods or services for which the calling units wait. Let us dissect this particular paragraph. So it includes factors as the expected waiting time of the calling units. For example, if you go to a McDonald's branch, if you go there at, let's say, 8 o'clock in the morning, would your expected waiting time be shorter or longer than if you go to that particular branch at 12 noon? Okay, it depends. And then the second one, expected length of the line. It also depends. So at certain times during the day, you can expect the length of the line to be shorter than certain times, like again at 12 noon. And then the percentage of idle time for the service facility enables you to determine how many crew members of that branch you're supposed to hire. Because if most of the time a number of them would not be doing anything, then you're not supposed to be hiring them at full force. So those are some of the things that we're going to deal with in terms of queuing. When queuing theory is applied, management's objective is usually to minimize two kinds of costs. First would be those associated with providing service, which is in terms of the number of service personnel you're going to hire in order for you to manage the queue. The second would be those associated with waiting time, which refers more to the opportunity loss of customers transferring their business to your competitor if their customer experience inside your establishment is not satisfactory. Remember, as you might have already learned from marketing, it is more expensive to acquire a new customer than to maintain an existing one. So you better know how to maintain an existing one. And one of the things that you have to deal with is their customer experience inside your establishment, part of which is their queuing experience. Following now are the parts of any queuing system. First, you have the calling population, which would be all the individuals or consumers who may at some point go into your establishment and fall in line. So, in a McDonald's branch, then that may be the people living within the vicinity of that branch, or working within the vicinity of that branch, or even studying within the vicinity of that branch, or even foreigners who are passing by and would like to taste a local version of a McDonald's burger, then they may also enter your establishment, and therefore they also can be part of your calling population. Next part is the queue itself. These are already the individuals who are inside your establishment and are in line. And each member of that particular queue, as we mentioned earlier, is called a calling unit. The third part is a service facility, which would be what the queue would be lining up for. So in a McDonald's branch, then that would be the counter, which takes your order as well as your payment. In a banking facility, then that may be your teller or your new accounts clerk, whichever or whoever provides service to your consumers. And then the fourth part would be the served call units, or those who have finished transacting with your establishment. Okay? For our discussion on queuing, we would only be focusing on the first three parts, namely the calling population, the queue, and the service facility, because the served calling units portion is a whole subject in itself. This is where loyalty programs would come in to ensure that your consumers continue to be engaged while they are using your products or services. Okay. So again, we're just going to be concentrating on the first three parts. Let's begin with the calling population. The calling population has three characteristics that are important to consider when deciding on what type of queuing model to apply. You have the size of the calling population, the pattern of arrivals of the queuing system, and the attitude of the calling units. Let's discuss each briefly, one at a time. The size of the calling population can be finite or infinite. The key to determining whether an infinite calling population can be assumed is whether the probability of an arrival is significantly changed when a member or members of a population are receiving service and thus cannot arrive to the system. For example, in a class of management science with 30 students enrolled, if one would go to the professor for grade consultation, then the professor automatically knows how much the population was reduced. It is 1 over 30. However, if you now go into the McDonald's scenario, if one student would go to a McDonald's branch, would the McDonald's branch manager know how much his calling population was reduced? It is 1 over what? And therefore, that particular scenario is where the calling population is considered infinite. Next characteristic is the pattern of arrivals of the queuing system, which can be predetermined or scheduled, or it can be random. If arrivals are scheduled, analytical queuing models are usually inappropriate. Why? Because if the scheduling process being applied is very efficient, then most likely there would be a time in between arrivals of consumers or customers. This is particularly true when you're dealing with high net worth individuals. For example, in a high-end aesthetic clinic, for example, like the one of Bello Medical. Most likely, they would not want their customers to wait for a long time before they are served. So most likely, their customer arrivals are scheduled or predetermined. And if such is the case, then they most likely would have an allowance in between arrivals and service time of each customer, such that once a customer would arrive, the customer would immediately be served. Now, if arrivals are random, then it is necessary to determine the probability distribution of the time between our intervals. Arrivals are random. Let's say there is a diarrhea outbreak in a specific barangay. So in a local health clinic, then the arrivals of patients would be random. Okay? And most likely they would not be scheduled. If such is the case, then there is a probability distribution of the time between the intervals of arrivals of patients. Now, it has been shown mathematically that if the probability density function of the inter-arrival times is exponential, meaning it increases over time, similar to your McDonald's branch, at the start of the day, only a few customers would arrive, but then as the day progresses, the number of customers would increase. Okay? And the increase is usually exponential in nature. Okay? So if that such is the case, calling units arrive according to a so-called Poisson process. Poisson arrivals generally exist in situations where the number of arrivals during a certain time interval is independent of the number of arrivals that have occurred in previous time arrivals, primarily because we are assuming here that the arrivals of customers is exponential over time. That's why the number of arrivals in a previous period cannot be the same as the number of arrivals in the succeeding periods. This basic property states that the conditional probability of any future event depends only on the present state of the system and is independent of previous states of the system. The Poisson probability density function gives the probability of n arrivals in time period t as follows. P sub n of t is equal to e raised to negative lambda t multiplied by lambda t raised to your small letter n over small letter n factorial, where small letter n is equal to the number of arrivals, t is the size of the time interval between arrivals, and lambda is the mean arrival rate per unit of time. Okay, so this is the one used for Poisson probability assumptions. It's just that what is important when you're dealing with a Poisson distribution is that the number of arrivals in previous time estimates is not going to be used or would not be a dependency on the existing time arrivals. Again, case in point, in banking, the usual schedule of payroll distribution is on the 15th and 30th of every month. So expect that on the 15th and 30th of every month, banks are full of customers. Okay, but then once you reach the dates of, let's say, the 29th or even the 14th of every month, most likely there are no customers in the bank. And therefore, you cannot say that the number of arrivals on the 15th or on the 30th of a month would be the same number of arrivals in succeeding days. So if that is the assumption, that is called Poisson probability density function, or distribution rather. Then the third characteristic of a calling population is the attitude of the calling units. The attitude of the calling units can be patient or impatient. Okay, what do you mean by patient attitude of calling units? If you would recall the Harry Potter series of movies in the US, whenever a new Harry Potter movie would come out, record shows that there are a lot of people already lined up outside of the movie houses, some even pitching their tents 3 days before the actual opening of the movie house for that particular movie. That is what is meant by being patient. Okay? Or whenever Apple would release a new version of the iPhone, again, a number of people would already be lined up outside of an Apple outlet, even 2 days before, just to be able to get, or to be one of the first to get the new version of the iPhone. Okay? Do you think that does not happen in the Philippines? Well, when H&M opened its branch in Mega Mall, and they said that they're going to provide the first few customers with a gift certificate, again, 2 days before, there were already a lot of people lined outside Mega Mall. Okay? Or even though there are specific concerts in the Philippines that are from popular groups like Coldplay, okay? Again, there are a lot of people who would line up even for more than a day just to get a ticket. That is what is meant by being patient. Okay? Now, in terms of impatient, there are several forms. you have balking and reneging as the main forms of impatient attitudes. Let me differentiate between the two. Let's say you went to a mall wherein you intend to purchase a gift for your friend. Okay, so you already found the item you would like to purchase and you are about to pay for that item. It's just that when you approached the cashier, apparently there's only one cashier open at the time and there are already 20 people in line in front of that cashier. Balking is the scenario wherein you would just say, your negative comments about the scenario or the situation. Why is it that the mall is allowing only one cashier to be open at this time? And why is it that they allow a long line to form, etc., etc., etc.? There are a lot of people who are like that. Okay? They are very vocal in terms of their comments. It's just that while they are balking, they do not even join the line. They just say negative comments about the scenario and then they leave. That is the first form of impatient attitude. The second one is, again, you are going to purchase an item. There's only one cashier and there are already 20 people in line. You are going to join the line. It's just that before reaching the cashier, you get out of the line. That's why it's still an impatient attitude. Okay? There are also a lot of people who are like that. Okay? Particularly nowadays, wherein we also experience scenarios wherein the ones in front of us are members of the elderly population or members of people with disability, wherein there are certain processes that have to be done separately, which would take longer than the usual processing time of a purchase. Okay, some people do not have the patience to wait, and therefore, even though they join the line, they would not get the service that they intended to get because they would get out of the line prior to receiving the service. That is reneging. So the main difference between balking and reneging is that in balking, the individual does not join the line at all. While in reneging, the person joins the line initially but then gets out of the line before receiving the service. There's actually another form of impatient attitude, but it would not be considered in this discussion. That one is the scenario wherein you go to a service facility wherein there are two cashiers. You join one line in front of a particular cashier. Then suddenly you notice that the other line in the second cashier is moving faster than where you lined up. So what are you going to do? Most people would go to the other line, join the other line, because they feel that the line is moving faster than where they started lining up for. Okay? And then again, when they have already shifted, suddenly they notice that where they lined up initially is now moving faster than where they are now. So again, what they do is they shift again to the other line. That form of impatient attitude is known as jockeying. It's like jockeying for position, or in Philippine traffic, so long as there is space, you go to that space. Okay? That is called jockeying. But we are not going to consider that in our discussion, but it is still a form of impatient attitude. So to summarize, in terms of the calling population characteristics, you have size, arrival pattern, and attitude. Under size, it can be finite or infinite. In terms of arrival pattern, it can be predetermined or random. Under random, it can be Poisson distribution or some other form of random distribution. In terms of attitude, it can be patient or impatient. Under impatient, you're just going to be using balking versus reneging. Next is the service facility. The service facility has three basic properties that we also have to consider. You have the structure of the queuing system, the distribution of service times, and the service discipline. In terms of the structure of the queuing system, it can be single-phase or multi-phase. Now, the great majority of queuing models are single-phase models. It is possible nonetheless to view a multi-phase system as separate, single-phase systems in which the output from one server becomes the input for another server. Let's explore the different possible structures. First is single-phase, single-channel queuing system. Okay. In your McDonald's branch, okay, usually the one who gets the service gets the money, gets the order, gets the money, and then provides the order to the customer is the cashier. Okay, so it is considered as a single phase type of transaction. If the McDonald's branch only has one cashier, then it is a single channel type of system. So it is single phase, single channel queuing system. Or in a bank scenario, if you're just going to deposit money, then most likely you're just going to transact with the teller. So that is single phase. If the bank branch only has one teller, then that is single channel as well. Then you have single phase multi-channel queuing system. In your McDonald's branch, there would now be more than one cashier, therefore it is still single phase, but then multi-channel. Or in your bank branch, if you have more than one teller, then that is single phase and then multi-channel as well. Third type of structure is multi-phase single-channel queuing system. This time, what if you went to the drive-thru of a McDonald's branch? So if you would imagine the drive-thru process, the first step would be for you to provide your order and payment to the first window. And then you are going to be asked to move to a second window where you are going to receive your order. In that instance, that is already multi-phase. If each window is manned by only one cashier, one cashier each, then that is still considered a single channel. So it's multi-phase, single channel. In a bank scenario, if let's say you're going to open an account first before making your initial deposit, then that means you have to go first to the new accounts clerk to sign up with the forms and comply with the KYC or Know Your Customer requirements of the Bangko Sentral. And then after which, then your application together with your initial deposit will be processed by the cashier. So that is already multi-phase. If there's only one new accounts clerk and only one cashier in the bank branch that you went to, then that is single channel. So multi-phase, single channel. And then of course you have the multi-phase, multi-channel queuing system wherein in your McDonald's drive-thru, there are two individuals manning the first window as well as more than one individual manning the second window. And in your bank branch scenario, there is more than one new accounts clerk and there's also more than one cashier to process your initial transaction in the bank. Next property of the service facility is the distribution of service times, which can be constant or random. If service time is a random variable, it is necessary to determine how that random variable is distributed. And in most cases, service times are exponentially distributed. As such, the probability of relatively long service times is small. What does that mean? First, let me differentiate between constant and random. A constant distribution of service times is usually attributed to processes or services that are automated. For example, if you withdrew 5,000 pesos from an ATM machine and it took you 3 minutes to do so, the next day, using the same ATM machine for the same type of transaction, which is a withdrawal, then the ATM machine should be able to dispense the money in the same amount of time you experienced the previous day, which is still 3 minutes. That is because the process is automated. So the random distribution of service times is usually attributed to face-to-face type of servicing, meaning individuals would have to be providing the service and therefore the service is not automated. So in most cases, it says here that service times are exponentially distributed. What does that mean? In exponential distribution, you divide the number of working hours in a given day by the number of customers served and assume that each customer received the same duration of service, even though, let's say, for example, in a regular 8-hour day, the first customer served was done in 2 hours. The second customer served was done in 1 hour. The third customer served was done in 3 hours. And then the fourth customer served was done in another 2 hours, completing the 8-hour duration of the day. So different customers receive different durations of service, but under exponential distribution, you simply divide the number of working hours by the number of customers that was served. So that is 8 divided by 4, and therefore you assume that each customer received the same duration of service, which is 2 hours. So you sort of distribute the service duration among all of the customers served. And it says there, given the case, then the probability of relatively long service time is small because you average out the duration of service per customer. And then the third basic property of the service facility is in terms of the service discipline. The service discipline determines which calling unit in the queuing system receives service. Following are classifications of service disciplines. The first is first come, first serve, which is self-explanatory. The second is priority. Okay, there are two forms of priority service disciplines. You have preemptive and non-preemptive. Preemptive is quite common nowadays because we already have facilities wherein there is a specific counter for the elderly as well as for persons with disability. It's just that whenever there are instances wherein there are no elderly customers and there are no people with disability, the person manning that particular counter can accept the transactions of other individuals. It's just that while they are performing a particular transaction from another individual and then suddenly an elderly would come in, for example, they would have to set aside whatever they're doing and immediately serve the elderly. That is preemptive. Okay? Whereas non-preemptive is, again, you have a counter that is supposedly for the elderly and for people with disability, but there is no elderly and people with disability, so the person manning that counter transacted or served another individual. But while the transaction is ongoing, an elderly would come in. Okay? Under non-preemptive, the individual would finish the transaction he's already involved in. And then once he is finished, then he would accept the service requirements of the elderly that came in. That is non-preemptive. Okay? But I would have to differentiate it further. Okay? Let us now consider a scenario wherein you have the emergency room of a particular hospital, wherein that emergency room is currently manned by one doctor. Okay, and the doctor is currently attending to a patient who has a minor injury. Okay. Then comes an ambulance carrying somebody who is having a heart attack. So under preemptive, the doctor would have to leave the patient with a minor injury and attend immediately to the one who is having a heart attack. Okay, that is preemptive. For non-preemptive, again, you have an emergency room with only one attending physician who is currently looking after a patient who has a minor injury. Then comes an ambulance with a patient having a heart attack. Then comes another ambulance carrying somebody, another patient who has been shot. Okay, so he has a bullet wound. Under non-preemptive, the doctor would have to finish attending to the individual with a minor injury. And the patient with a minor injury has to be satisfied with the service of the doctor before he allows the doctor to see other patients. Now, once the doctor is allowed to see other patients, the doctor now has the prerogative to determine who among those waiting he would serve next. So even though the patient who is having a heart attack arrived earlier than the one who has been shot, the doctor can still choose the one who has been shot over the one who is having a heart attack, depending on the gravity of the situation. So that still is non-preemptive, but it is not anymore first come, first serve. And the third classification is random service discipline, wherein there is no actual structure in terms of service delivery. For example, if let's say a group of students, a whole class of students of 40 students went on a field trip, and the bus carrying the 40 students lost control and went over a ravine or a cliff, and you end up with 40 students being injured. So when the students were brought to the hospital emergency room, do you think they're still going to fall in line? Most likely they're just going to rush inside, find a doctor, and randomly ask for help. That is what is meant by random service discipline. So again, to summarize, in terms of the service facility characteristics, you have structure, service times, and service discipline. Under structure, it can be single phase or multi-phase. In terms of service times, both in terms of structure again, it can be single phase or multi-phase, both of which can be single channel or multi-channel. In terms of service times, it can be constant or random. Under random, it can be exponential or some other form of random distribution. In terms of service discipline, it can be first come, first serve, priority, or random. Under priority, you have preemptive and non-preemptive. Okay? So what happens in queuing analysis or queuing models is that all of these characteristics of the calling population and the service facility would be mixed together and come up with queuing models. Each queuing model would have its own list of assumptions in terms of the calling population and in terms of the service facility. Okay? So what happens is that once you are given a scenario to analyze, you first have to identify the assumptions given in that scenario and then match those assumptions against the assumptions of a particular queuing model. So in effect, queuing analysis is just a matching game. After you have correctly matched the assumptions of the scenario you are analyzing versus the assumptions of a particular queuing model, then it's just a matter of substituting the data provided in the scenario with or into the formulas of the queuing model you have chosen. That is what we're going to do next.